Malta evolved into a B2B hub.
Excellent. I guess we can start. Good morning once again. Well, Malta's success story for this industry, for a gaming industry, started over 24 years ago when a quite a limited in scope regulatory regime was introduced. Then the regime grew, became more sophisticated, developed, evolved, and that's where we are today. And the driving force for this transformation and for this success story have been business-to-consumer operators, B2Cs. They have been at the core of this progress, of the success story, and at the core of development of the whole ecosystem around iGaming. Yet, lately, it seems to me that there is a shift, there has been a shift in the approach. It looks like the country is developing more into a B2B hub. We see less B2C new applications being filed. There is more focus on regulatory aspects of B2B. Am I wrong, or you agree with this approach? And if you do, what do you think are the driving forces, the reasons for this shift?
Thanks, Olga. Hi, good morning. Yes, I think I'm being heard. So actually, I think that it's sort of a natural progression to all that you said. As you rightfully said, obviously gaming started off, you know, I mean, quite a considerably long time ago in Malta. Malta set up the hub, set up the infrastructure and all of that. There was a time when, you know, B2C offerings were sort of what started it all out, and Malta was the only jurisdiction where you could get a license for B2C offering. But as things evolved over time, we moved to, even as Robert said in his address, where we moved to the country approach. For a moment there, I would say Malta sort of felt that there is a chance that it loses its relevance, because obviously in a country approach, its significance is much smaller. But actually, what Malta had already done was recognize the B2B focus, right? Or it was already possible in 2004 with the first framework to actually license B2Bs. And in some ways, I would say now that the infrastructure is created here, the people are here, a lot of the companies are here, and we're at a point where there is, you know, certain saturation in the market and certain sort of leveling happening in the market, but we are diversifying at the same time. And one of the sort of consequences of that is that there is more focus on B2B. So I call it sort of a natural progression, and a happy one at that. So, you know, there's much more to do in that space, I believe.
Carl, what is your take on this?
I agree that it's an evolution. It's very similar. I think Malta has evolved as the industry has evolved. So in the past, if I look back 10 years, the biggest diversifying factor between different operators was how many games and what games they could offer, the B2Cs. Nowadays, everyone has essentially everything. So if you look at all the aggregators giving you multiple providers, and most of the B2Cs will have the most popular games, they're all the same. So then it starts with, okay, so where's the innovation happening? Innovation is the B2Bs, which I think is also part of the reason why we're seeing more and more, and why Malta has attracted more and more. And nowadays, possibly back full circle, as you mentioned recently, Olga, back full circle with in-house development to some extent to have exclusivity on some games. And I think Malta has evolved together with the industry, moving from a lot of B2Cs and perhaps fewer B2Bs to nowadays where the industry has a lot of B2Bs, different types of B2Bs, as Malta has recognized even in the regulatory framework. So it's just evolved along with the industry, I guess.
It's an interesting point because, as you said, Carl, there seems to be a full circle because, you know, when it all started, the B2Cs were kind of a monolithic offering. Everything was in-house. And then over the years, B2Bs became a separate offering, and there have been fragmentation of the business model. And now it seems to be converging back together. And all of your companies, actually, are predominantly B2C. So continuing with this discussion, Yanica, what about your company? Is it also kind of going and incorporating some B2B aspects
Thanks, Olga, and thanks to everyone for being here so early. I would say so, yes. And I think it's because of the natural shift, as my colleagues mentioned, because that's one way that a company can diversify its offering, is create its own games or develop some form of B2B arrangement itself. And that's something that the company I work for is also doing. And I think one of the benefits of Malta in that sense is that because Malta has been regulating B2Bs for so long, it gets it, basically. And that is gambling regulation, although it's been around for a while, in some of the countries it's rather new, and especially B2B regulation. And we're seeing more and more jurisdictions regulate B2Bs, but it is a fairly new form of regulation for some of these countries. But Malta gets it because Malta has been doing it for a long time. In fact, B2B regulation is now, it's in its second wave of legislation in Malta. So that's one of the benefits. And as Corinne mentioned earlier as well, the infrastructure is here, everything is here, and so it's easy in that sense because you can speak to the regulator about your business. And on this note, if I may, I think it would be really interesting if we could see more regulators collaborate, at least on this B2B element increasingly, because I think there are less differentiating factors when it comes to regulating B2Bs than potentially B2Cs. So it would be really interesting to see more collaboration on this front amongst our regulators.
That's an interesting point, because obviously as we see more countries actually introduce and focus B2B requirements for the license, even though even a few years ago it wasn't like that, except Malta. How do you see this developing?
I think a lot of the countries have different reasons for regulating B2B. So even if you look at the scope, it's not the same. For example, Malta has, as Yanica said, it's the second iteration of B2B regulation, and it changed from the old RGRs to the Gaming Act and the regulations in 2018. And I think a lot of it is, as Yanica said, it would be interesting to see a bit more cooperation because there's much less distinction between what regulators seem to want to achieve out of B2B regulation. But the scope of it changes because of the regulatory or policy priority, to call it that way. But what you have in Malta, which is, I think, what also helps make it a B2B hub, regardless of the fact that more countries are regulating B2B as well in different ways, you can, and Yanica mentioned this briefly, you can speak to the regulator. So we're speaking a lot about innovation. What distinguishes one operator from another? We offer a lot of the same things. So innovation is a lot of that differentiating factor then. So the fact that in Malta, even if you have something new, something which doesn't necessarily fit into the pigeonholes of the regulation, although the regulation itself is very flexible, the fact that you can have a conversation with the regulator, make sure that the objectives that the law seeks to achieve are still achieved. But do something new, do something different. That, I think, is part of what retains Malta's status as a hub, even on the B2B aspect.
You reminded me, Carl, back in my early days at the MGA, one of the buzzwords we used was that our regulation was technology neutral. And it's so true, and it continues to ring true today. And with B2B regulation, I think it's actually a very exciting time because although Malta has regulated it for a long time, there were, I think, a couple of others until the Sweden and Denmark stints, right? Recently, there was one of the Eastern European states, was it Romania? Exactly. Romania, UK, of course, has also been regulating B2B. But if you look at the definitions of those jurisdictions, and now very recently Sweden and Denmark, and the rationales for their regulation, they're different every time. So we're at a point where we're seeing a lot of different sort of approaches to B2B regulation. I am sure there are synergies that can be identified, that can be gained from the way this is being approached. And perhaps it would be a time that, well, maybe regulators will come together on this one. But in any case, even if they don't, it's a very exciting time for Malta to actually look at itself and look at what it can try to achieve through its regulation. Maybe revise certain approaches, maybe revise certain definitions to make sure it is capturing what it needs to capture for the continuous development of its own market, sort of its own setup here. So I would say, yeah, it's good. It's a possibility.
it looks like we gave up the hope that things will be unified and harmonized on overall arching level. So let's focus on at least small things that we can manage
Hope
better.
is the last to die, Olga. But
Yes, I know, hope is the last to
steps.
die. But yes, it makes sense to focus on a step-by-step approach in this case and try to push it and help the development that at least step-by-step, certain things that are not controversial, the regulatory goals are the same, are harmonized to make life for everybody easier. So in this context of Malta developing more as a B2B hub, how has it worked overall for you, for each of your companies? Because as we said, predominantly you're known to be a B2C operator. So how has it worked out for you?
No, I speak for Betsson here, but in general, obviously it bodes well because in increasingly competitive environments, the diversification is what is key, I guess. And, we have done that through, different companies around the world have done that through acquisitions and consolidations. But there is, this is another aspect, how you can achieve that, how you can continue to remain relevant on such a competitive and dynamic market. We have recently, for example, announced our acquisition of Sporting Solutions, which is totally out of sort of the what we have grown up doing, which is B2C casino and betting. But this is another sort of product to our portfolio now, which could hopefully help us achieve reach other areas and other sort of audiences that we couldn't have reached before. And that's just one thing, it's also our in-house platforms that can continue to sort of receive recognition within Malta and also now abroad. We can offer those services to other operators who are just starting out and still, need their PAMs and need a sports betting platform. All of this is obviously, so for Betsson, it bodes very well. Betsson's home is originally Malta, we've been here for a long time. And it's good to see that home keeps us here, sort of. It's a two-way relationship after all.
Carl?
Oh, for us, very much the same. It's that kind of evolution of Malta has accompanied very nicely LeoVegas' evolution over the years with our acquisition of Push, our recent launch of LeoVegas Studios, our typical software acquisition. So it's very much in line with what we've been doing over the years, very similarly. And I think Malta, our two homes are Malta and Stockholm, although now we have many homes all over the globe, but the homes, and in fact our largest global office is here in Malta. We've continued to grow, and that is where on a wider level than the regulatory framework, the overall infrastructure in Malta, and by that I mean both human resources insofar as employees, both service providers, there's everything. Never quite in the amounts that we want, but there's everything, and I think that is also key going forward, because for us, aside from the regulatory framework, which, as I said, a lot of the benefit of it, regardless of the country developments, is that kind of that approachability and that flexibility, and the fact that Malta was, I think, the first, although some other regulators are coming around to it, but Malta was the first within Europe to treat operators genuinely as partners in trying to protect players and in achieving the regulatory objectives rather than opponents. But aside from that, there's also the establishment factor. So why do we continue to grow in Malta? We continue to grow in Malta because there's employees, but also because the other factors, both in terms of taxation, both personal and corporate, be it HQP, be it VAT, be it income tax, those have been good, and they need to remain good moving forward.
Yanica, what keeps Evoke here in Malta?
Evoke has been in Malta for many years now, owing to its Mr. Green offices, eventually William Hill and 888, and now it's rebranded to Evoke. And Malta remains such a big hub for us, precisely because, as I said earlier, and it's as simple as that really, Malta gets it, and the regulation is technology neutral. The regulator has been here for a long time. They know the ins and outs of regulation, and they're very willing to listen, to help, and to allow gaming companies to be what they always should have been, which is basically a technology company, an innovative company. We offer gambling services and gambling products to our customers, but a lot of us, especially due to the M&A nature of the industry, we are very technological companies. We have our own platforms. We create our own games, we develop our own systems, and we need a regulator that understands this. And Malta has always been that regulator and continues to be. So I think, and it's really interesting to see us speak about B2B at a conference like this, because I think, 3-4 years ago, this would have been a solely B2C discussion probably, and now we're talking about these aspects. And obviously it's a learning curve for a lot of our companies, because a lot of us are traditionally B2C, and we've either acquired or we've invested in new technologies to start producing different kind of services. But that is why, especially now, it is really important for regulators to speak among themselves, to speak with us, because for many regulators, this is also a learning curve, B2B regulation. And I think Malta remains a leader in that sense, and should be perhaps leading or facilitating discussions with other regulators about this topic.
Great. Of course, in the world that changes every day, once we stop moving with the world, then it's the beginning of the end. So if there is a shopping list, so to speak, your wish list for the country to remain relevant and attractive to B2Bs and to B2Cs, what would it be? Each of you, please.
I think sort of what I said earlier, I haven't thought about this or researched this in any great detail, but sort of ensuring that the way we are capturing B2Bs, the MGA, Malta's regulation, is capturing B2Bs is effective and efficient enough. So having a very well-rounded definition, as I recall, the reason sort of you would get your platform licensed in Malta is if you are offering, is in order to enable you to offer your platform to other operators licensed in Malta, right? But that is sort of purely from the platform, the PAM perspective, the player account management perspective, and the games platform perspective. Maybe we need to look a little bit more beyond that. You guys maybe remember it with more clarity, but the sort of the criticality of what the B2B provision is, right? Maybe offering less critical B2B services would also warrant a mandatory license or approval from the MGA, because that certificate has become important, for recognition in Europe, in the world. The fact that you have license, if you want to operate in a regulated environment, then yes, it's better to have that stamp of approval, even if in order to offer that service in some other jurisdictions, you do not need that license. That stamp of approval gives you that sort of push to be able, validation, to be able to continue to offer it. Even from a commercial perspective, you can sell it better. So I think that would be a good move for the MGA.
I'm conscious of that timer, and I'm conscious of leaving enough time for Yanica. So
my screen does not show the time, so we can go on.
No, my shopping at the top of my shopping list. So all of what Corinne said, I do agree with. I think it warrants a bit of a look again, because it's now 2024. So 6 years have passed, and in 6 years technology has done leaps. But more importantly, at the top of my shopping list are the establishment factors, even more than the regulatory factors. We need to get those right.
Everything they said, plus as a regulatory advisor, obviously at the top of my wish list, but this is a pure wish, is some element of harmonization of what B2B actually is in various countries, and would make my life a lot easier, but potentially also would make me redundant, so maybe not.
On that note,
she sounds the most hopeful of us, I must say. She keeps saying it.
On that note, we are running out of time. Thank you very much for this insightful discussion. It looks like Malta, in its evolved way, will remain, for some time to come at least, be the hub for this industry and the center of excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Olga.